In fact, to get ahead, in fact, just to survive in the Oceania of 1984, you must be able not just to practice, but to be convinced of doublethink and doublespeak. Doublethink is the ability to hold in your mind at the same time two clearly contradictory ideas and to believe them both sincerely, and to speak what is an obvious lie and believe sincerely that you are speaking the truth. And in 1984, published in 1948, so just reversing the digits, Orwell portrayed the new age under a totalitarian society. Now, before we worry that, gosh, it doesn't seem very far from 1948 until 1984, you must remember that that same brief span was roughly the time that went from Stalin's absolute totalitarianism of the late 40s back to all the hopes of 1917 and the Russian Revolution. And Stalin is very much at the center of the portrayal of Big Brother in 1984. All over the city of London, as all over Oceania, that great third part of the world that now exists in this new order and new age, Big Brother is watching. Posters of Big Brother. Rather handsome man, middle-aged, with a heavy black mustache. Stalin. Now, the very name, Big Brother is watching, why, I don't know if that's terrifying to you. Don't we say Santa Claus is watching you? So Big Brother's just watching to see what you do. But you cannot escape it in this world of 1984.
Sing to the sailors on the floating fortress. Sing to the soldiers on the battlefield. Sing to the airmen in the burning azure. Sing to the farmers rising yields. We are
From his first days of power, Hitler knew that he had to bring the children of Germany under his control. The future of the Third Reich rested on their shoulders. Hitler wanted to produce a generation of dedicated and ruthless Nazis. A generation who could realize his dream of conquering the world.
Enemy of the people, Comrade Rosenblum was executed for participating in a plot to assassinate Big Brother and several cabinet members. Comrade Rosenblum's public hanging was scheduled for Saturday on the ministry's Asbury Square scaffold. An offer of
Winston Smith toils in the bowels of an Ingsoc Party ministry, the Ministry of Truth.
Times 14,284, meaning plenty mal-quoted chocolate.
His daily orders are to rewrite history, literally.
Rewrite for wise. Of sub anti-Friday.
The previous version of the truth is packed away and thrown down the memory hole. It is party policy rigidly enforced to maintain absolute control.
Winston's job at the Ministry of Truth is to fabricate history. For it is an essential slogan of the party, the English Socialist Party. It is an essential doctrine of the party that he who controls the present controls the past, and he who controls the past controls the future. If you have power, then you can rewrite history. And by rewriting history, you can determine what future generations will think happened. It's not an alien notion to our own day. After all, many professors of history believe there is no such thing as absolute historical fact, that history is all a matter of perceptions, and how the elite write history and how we must resuscitate from history all the sufferings of the past. So there is no absolute history. That is just part of the doctrine of the party. And Winston works day after day in his little cubicle, surrounded by other equally diligent workers, minor members of the party, having joined the party for political advancement, some degree out of conviction. And he will get a little, through a pneumatic tube, he'll get a notice, and it'll be a newspaper article. And it will say that Big Brother, the week before, had announced that there would be a 10% rise in the number of razor blades produced. Well, in fact, there isn't going to be any such rise at all. And, in fact, there will be a drop in the number of razor blades produced. So Winston simply rewrites the article to say that Big Brother has predicted a drop in the production of razor blades. It will now be sent out, a whole nother set of newspapers for that day. Millions and millions and millions of newspapers will be run off and all the old copies destroyed. Or it may be that he will get a little notice that John Williams is a non-person. Well, a month before, the newspapers had carried a story about John Williams being a very brave soldier in the ongoing constant war against East Asia, the great enemy of Oceania. Well, now this newspaper will be rewritten to say that John Williams does not exist. That is to say, he will just disappear from that story. He's gone. And every article that ever mentioned John Williams will be removed, all those copies of the paper destroyed, and new ones issued. So anytime you look up what happened on December the 1st, 1983, you will not find a John Williams. He never existed. And Winston does all of this in the most dutiful fashion. This is his responsibility, it's his job, and he carries it out. Because after all, in 1984, in the Oceania of 1984, there is no truth. So one of those first questions that we dealt with, is there absolute truth? The answer is no. Truth is whatever the party says truth is. Is there God? No. God has been officially banished, as God was officially banished from the Soviet Union. There's no truth. There is no God. There is no absolute good and evil. It is all what the party says. And Winston has spent his adult life in this atmosphere. But he can remember vaguely that there was a time when London was not a boarded up, poverty-stricken city, and that there might have been a time when there wasn't an Oceania. He even remembers that he had a mother, but she disappeared. And now it is with the greatest difficulty, after years of being bombarded with what the party says is the truth, that Winston, in his mind, can reflect, try to reconstruct what it was like before the party. That, too, is part of controlling the past and controlling all sources of information. Again, this is not fiction. Ask anyone who lived during the Third Reich or who lived in Stalin's Russia. It was all but impossible to find out what was going on outside of the controlled news broadcast of the party.
Well, we want the museums to treat our country fairly. We want the museums to talk about the history of our country in a fair manner, not in a woke manner or in a racist manner, which is what many of them, not all of them, but many of them are doing.
President Trump there outlining his motives in ordering a review of exhibitions and materials at 8 Smithsonian museums, including the National Museum of African American History and Culture and the National Museum of the American Indian. The White House says it plans to replace what it considers divisive or ideologically driven language with unifying, historically accurate and constructive descriptions. Well, joining me now is our friend Eddie Glaude, James S. McDonald, distinguished professor at Princeton University and an MSNBC contributor and analyst. And you know, Eddie, I'm just guessing that you've got something to say about this because you are a history professor. So who gets to decide what is divisive versus historically accurate, not to mention the president's depictions of what is, quote, woke and racist?
Well, look, first of all, it's always great to see you, Alex. And, we're dealing with this internet, so I hope I can get through this. But I think it's really important for us to understand what Donald Trump is up to. I think it's very clear that he's trying to tell a story of America that coincides with his own political ambitions, his own conception of America as a white republic. And so, unlike other presidents who believe that we were always already on the road to the more perfect union, Donald Trump believes that the country's perfection was evidenced in its founding. So we can't tell a story about our failings because those stories call into question our inherent goodness and our divine mission. So he's seeking a history that confirms his politics in so many ways. Alex, I think it's a politics that's rooted in a white nationalist project, and we need to call it for what it is.
I was talking with someone off camera about this, and they said, here's the thing. You don't have to really focus on this too much, because if he does make changes, that very quickly they can be undone once he's out of office? Does that give you any, like, well, yeah, he's going to do what he's going to do?
No, usually when we've been in these sorts of patterns as a country, they last for 50 plus years. The analogy to make, the historical analogy to make, would be to the end of radical Reconstruction, its collapse in 1875 and 1876. And what we know is that doesn't get undone until 1954 with the Brown v. Board decision. And what's really distinctive about the collapse of radical Reconstruction is the lost cause, its redemption. It's the very ways in which the nation tell itself its story. And so there are moments actually in the latter part of the 19th century and the early 20th century, in the 1920s, Alex, where there were school districts that refused to teach Reconstruction. They refused to teach slavery. And so this is a kind of repetition and echoing, a rhyming past. And so we just can't assume that we get the back of Donald Trump's head and we're going to be in a better position. No, because Donald Trump is just the tip of the rot. The rot is much deeper in the country, it seems to me.
Speaking of schools, Eddie, last week the White House asked colleges for admissions data. But as Trump seeks to eliminate any consideration of race in college admissions, critics and supporters alike are calling him out for not tackling, say, legacy admissions, the edge that's given to the children of alumni or relatives of wealthy donors. So is that blatantly unfair?
It's not only blatantly unfair, it also reveals what's really motivating the policy. The problem is always with black students or brown students who get admission. White students or Asian students, they don't get a seat because these unqualified black students are getting seats. Why is that necessarily the case? About a range of folks, right? I'm sorry, this is this internet, I'm sorry. But why aren't we talking about athletes
keep going.
and others? Right? Why aren't we talking about these other ways in which classes are constituted? Instead, it's always these black folk. Trump is trying to, in so many ways, cut the pipeline off by cutting off access to these extraordinary institutions that give us social capital.
Beastly.
According to his mother, Orwell's first word was beastly, which is unusual language for a 2-year-old. Towards the end of his life, Orwell became increasingly concerned that the English language was being treated in a beastly manner.
Items 1, 5, 7 ref, full wise.
In the book, some of Orwell's blackest humour is aimed at what he thought to be the debasement of language. From mindless clichés and deceptive euphemisms to acronyms that dehumanize and intimidate.
Full wise up file rectify ref 4/6/84 unperson double ungood uncrown. Double plus ungood.
Reference to BDR and Martin/Kelly. She terminated at 3:06 but wanted a TTC on the
Every year, fewer and fewer words, and the range of consciousness always a little smaller. The whole climate of thought will be different. In fact, there will be no thought as we understand it now. Orthodoxy means not thinking, not needing to think. Orthodoxy is unconsciousness.
Orwell's disgust with the decline of language and literature was a constant theme in 1984.
And indeed, the world of 1984 is a world in which language itself is controlled, and speech is constantly being revised to reflect the political currents of the time. What the party wants said must be said in a language that is approved. And there is an elaborate dictionary being worked on at the Ministry of Truth, which will largely eliminate many, many words from the English language, or so redefine them that any sense of individual liberty or honor is removed, or even individual thought. For thought is controlled as well as language in 1984. And the most dreaded of all instruments of control is the thought police. The thought police operating out of the Ministry of Love, an enormous windowless building surrounded by barbed wire.
The Centre for Policy Studies, or CPS, believes British politicians are topping the league.
Orwell talked about newspeak in his novel 1984, as you will know, and the language of government controlling the way people thought, ultimately. Orwell's phrase was that, that language isn't just changed by us, but changes the way we think. And governments can change the way people think, possibly by the use of language.
So the CPS put together the Lexicon 2008, a guide that decodes the language used by politicians to cover up their actions. Their concern is that the new Labour spin doctors have taken the manipulation of language to the extreme over the past 10 years.
Well, of course, people joke about Gordon Brown being Stalinist in his approach to government, and there's always some truth in a joke like that, insofar as our present Prime Minister does like to make big announcements about long-term plans in the way that socialist regimes have always put forward plans for people's lives. And it is curious that the language is remarkably similar to that.
And I want to see local government strengthened with new powers, local communities empowered to hold those who make decisions to account, community ownership of assets, greater power for more people to control their lives, government putting our trust in people, and we will renew people's trust in government.
So it seems that euphemisms, avoidance and vagueness have come to dominate government speeches. But do those sitting behind these walls realize that they're being repetitive and only get us all confused by benchmarks, visions and strategic frameworks? Well, that is the question. So we asked somebody who's got his eyes on a seat in Parliament as an opposition Lib Dem candidate. Is this language a real problem?
You can always be flippant about this, say actually it's just a dictionary, it's a joke, but actually language is the ultimate control over people's thoughts. I certainly feel nervous at the government picking language, picking words deliberately, and combined with identity cards, CCTV cameras, and what feels like a sort of state intrusion on my life.
And Ed admits, if you go into politics, it's contagious.
And quite often you'll say, look, we have to address this, which is code for we have to get it off. I thought that was quite clever, particularly as it was the first one. Oh my God, I've used that myself.
What about the people? Are they brainwashed by their politicians?
They assume that everybody believes in the spin, but I think we've reached the stage now where we're so inured to it, we don't believe them even when they're not spinning.
That's what they do, they shout like that. They shout and throw pieces of paper.
Lies, yeah, truth is their version of the truth.
So maybe the time has come for some politicians to change their ways. Daria Peshkova, Russia Today, London.
I like to say it's not cancel culture, it's totalitarianism.
Right.
Let's be real here.
Mhm.
It's not, fake news, it's media propaganda.
Right.
That's another one. And
Yeah.
then same thing with the curriculum. It's not DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion training, it's indoctrination.
Exactly.
So we need to stop using these fruity words in America as if this couldn't happen here, and we need to start calling it what it is.